Welcome to the Long Take Review, where four college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with three goons who are here to keep an eye on me. First, he's so sorry he has to leave, but there's an emergency. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
Jen, should I call 911? I'm doing well, Jen, reasonably speaking. How are you?
The Bostonian tries a New York accent. That went about as what I would expect. And he thinks he broke his nose. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Deal. I'm good, Jen. Very excited to talk about a crazy movie. This is the craziest one we've talked about in a while. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear everybody's thoughts on it. And last but not least, he wants to invite you to his New Year's Eve party. It's going to be a banger. It's Antonio Elefano. How are you doing, Antonio?
I shared my playlist and he was very rude and dismissive. I'm doing fine.
I love that. Wow, lots of accent work today. Oh, I guess I should have expected that, but it didn't occur to me. So, listeners, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Sean Baker's Anora, which is out in theaters now. The story follows, as you can tell by the accent work, a New York erotic dancer, I think is what he calls her in the movie, and who falls in love with a Russian oligarch. And then chaos ensues, and we're gonna revel in that chaos and talk all about it today. So if you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen Anora, and then with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. I don't know if anything's going to be a huge soul-crushing spoiler necessarily, but I think it's worth it to go in fresh and not with no expectations. So for this one in particular, I might say make sure you stick to the spoiler-free section, which should be about the first 20 to 30 minutes. This is a neon film, and so eventually, once it's streaming, it'll be on Hulu. It is a pretty strong Oscar contender, though, so it might be a while before it lands on Hulu.
It's also doing a platformed release, so it hasn't technically gone wide yet. Like, it's added theaters, but it's not officially wide.
Okay, so yeah, even longer then. So I think, but I feel like, I was trying to figure out, this would benefit from sort of a well-placed streaming re-release for the Oscar campaign. And so that would probably be over the holidays, would be my guess, that would be wise for them to do that if they wanted to get that boost. At any rate, PT, if listeners want to marry us after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Well, after they spend some time in the private room, if they don't want to miss future episodes when they drop, they can follow the Long Take Review wherever they get their podcasts. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, wherever you obtain podcasts. You can find us there. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. And we are on Letterboxd. The account is at LTR Pod. You can also search for the hashtag LTR Pod to look at the individual films we have all been watching. Jen?
Thanks, PT. We are just about ready to get into our review of Anora. But first, we have a kind of movie news update that I recorded with Greg earlier today. So if you want Greg's spoiler-free reactions to Nickel Boys and The Brutalist, you can keep listening. If you want to skip ahead to our Anora review, then I'll leave a timestamp in the show notes. And it's probably about 30 minutes, give or take. So here's my conversation with Greg about The Brutalist and Nickel Boys.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
So we have Greg here for a special segment because, Greg has normally seen more movies than I have. But in this case, he has seen two movies that are major contenders in the Oscar race, potentially. And we wanted to get his spoiler-free early reaction. So if you haven't seen these movies, and it's likely you have not, we will keep this discussion, this part of the episode, spoiler-free. So Greg, tell us, what movies have you seen? I'm really jealous.
Thank you for indulging me. Listeners, that you should know this is purely because I was so jealous of the rest of the crew getting to go to the film festival a couple weeks ago. I did just see I might be able to see Blitz this weekend, so then I'll catch up with you at least on that one. So in Boston this past weekend, the Independent Film Festival, which primarily takes place in May, put together what they call the Fall Focus series. And it was 3 straight days of movies at the Brattle Theater and then 1 bonus screening at the Somerville Theater. These things mean something to locals who may be listening. But really what that means is a very small theater hosted a whole bunch of screenings, and then they busted out the 70 millimeter giant theater for a special screening. So if I was not a dad and I was unemployed, which, whoa, I wish I was unemployed, I would go to all of these because it's such a great opportunity to catch up on this. And the director of the series said that essentially they do this because, you know, they see what becomes hot in the fall festival season and the Oscar race, and they want to give Boston film fans a chance to get any of them that weren't in that earlier festival. Because by May, you know a little bit. You can often get a couple hot Sundance shows, but now the races are coming into kind of clearer picture. They got some great movies. I wanted to see so many, Jen. Flo was here. The Seed of the Sacred Fig, is that how the title?
Yes.
Was here. Hard Truths was here, but it's also out in like a week. So I skipped that one, kind of knowing it's there. Amelia Perez, I believe, was here in town this weekend too. But I had to pick carefully, so I went with my heart/hype draft pick, Nickel Boys, and then the one that I thought would be most difficult to see otherwise, which was The Brutalist. They at both screenings, as they introduced them, they pointed out neither of these films are going to be out in Boston till at least mid-January. So I don't know about LA. I mean, they have to get some screenings out there for Oscar contention, I believe, at least in New York and LA. So you might have a better shot than that. But I was really glad I saw at least these two before time came. So
yeah, but that still means that we won't have like a limited release that includes LA and New York. They usually only do those like 2 weeks before the date that you mentioned. So like,
yeah, I think it has to be by Christmas somewhere to get the Oscar nominations, right? But still, it could just be like a very limited run and then this. So I think it's going to be a while. And I think in the case of both, they are very afraid of these films leaking out. So I'll start by talking about Nickel Boys, but this is true for Nickel Boys, and I believe it was true for Brutalist as well. Nickel Boys is an Amazon MGM release, and they had security guards with night vision goggles in the theater the whole time watching because they don't want it to leak out in any way for piracy. And I think it's because it's so early, and that's not unheard of. But the first time I ever experienced that was Borat, because they really didn't want the original Borat's kind of sneaky surprises to sneak out there. I will stay very spoiler free. But to talk first about Nickel Boys, listeners will probably remember this is a hype draft pick for me. I needed something in a lane that would be an Oscar contender, and I hoped back in, when did we do that? June, that this might be a real Best Picture player. And I primarily picked that off the strength of a deep, deep love of the novel, which I think is, without hyperbole, one of the best novels of the 21st century. And so I was very, very excited about this one, and my expectations were sky high. And so it pains me to say they were not met. And I will keep it a little broad and just say that's not to say this isn't an incredible film. I would absolutely recommend everybody still see it. I think there will inevitably be some awards in the mix, including most likely a Best Picture nominee. But I would say I was hoping the buzz about this one was wrong, and the buzz largely ended up being correct. Jen, since you can be even more spoiler-free, how would you characterize the buzz about Nickel Boys?
So the buzz has been somewhat mixed, as with a lot of things this season, more so than normal, I'd say. And I think the question I was going to ask you is, how does the style of filmmaking the sort of first person camera work, how much does that factor into your disappointment? Because that seems to be the dividing factor. The people who love it say that it's like such bold filmmaking. It's so innovative. It's really like pushing the boundaries of what cinema can do. And then other people sort of say, well, but that forced me to be detached from the characters. It took me out of the story. And like, even if it is kind of a formalist experiment, that it's kind of disappointing from a storytelling perspective. So where are you landing kind of on that spectrum?
Yeah. So I would say two things, and then I'll answer the question. The first is the first person perspective is pervasive. It is, basically the entire film. I had wondered from trailers if it might be just some sequences or a partial. There are some shots in the trailer where you get a sense that it might not be, but generally speaking, it's the whole film. And the second thing I'll say is I would complain a lot about the form, but it's less about the first person than it is about some editorial choices, which is they within, it's a story of a protagonist who ends up in a boys' prison and the events that happen to him. The plural is because he makes a very good friend, and it's the story of what happens to those two friends. And intercut into that, the director makes some very bold choices. We know this director, is it one or is it two? I forget if it's a pair.
It's one. Ramel
It's
Ross,
one?
I
Okay.
believe.
And he comes to us from documentary, and I would say the choices that look like documentary are fine, right? Kind of intercutting some news footage that I don't believe is real. I think it's, created for that. But there are a lot of kind of more what I would call art, not even art house, but like visual art installation choices of just splicing in some visual metaphors and stuff like that. So like, oh, this person's life is shooting off like a rocket. Let's put in a rocket, for example, or something like that. And those I found to be very jarring because they were either too on the nose or just seemed totally unnecessary. So I would say, to answer the question finally, I would complain about the form, but it's less about the first person conceit. If you don't like the first person conceit, I can see that you would just totally pass on.
Right, it's a deal breaker.
Yeah, but I would say for me, how I would characterize the form is it was just overwrought. This story to me, and this again is somebody speaking who loved the novel, the story's good enough on its own. I just wanted to see that kind of translated to screen. And there are some story reasons why I kind of thought they might have gone for the first person, but I would say it wasn't even necessary for those story reasons. It really just kind of felt like a filmmaker who wanted to show off a little. And it was form for form's sake. And look what I can do. It felt like something like 1917. That's like, it's a oneer, right? Like, get excited.
Right.
Like, yeah, here we go. And, I'm all for that. I'm all for formal experimentation. My review of Robert Zemeckis here aside. But I do think that you have to have a reason and you have to have a really clear storytelling point. And I would say for me, I just didn't feel like Nickel Boys was getting there. The crowd seemed largely into it and affected. That may have just been the loud gentleman behind me who, as soon as the credits started to roll, just went like, wow. One of those very film festival reactions. So I don't think, but I went with a friend, and the friend had not read the book, and is interested in a lot of the issues. The film is very much about racial injustice and the lives of Black boys, as the main protagonist would suggest, and neither of us were very high. I think just to letterbox it, spoiler free, I think we were both at 3.5 is where we ended
Oof.
up.
Yeah, that's much lower than I would have guessed probably for you.
And I'm pretty positive. So yeah,
yeah, that's really interesting. So well, first of all, my condolences, because I know this is a hype draft disappointment.
That means I only got 50% on mine. I mean, again, all four were worth seeing. Even the train wreck of Megalopolis, you should see so you can talk about it for years to come. But yeah, 50% is not a good grade on the hype draft.
Wait, so you've now seen all the films in your hype draft?
Well, the other two were Monkey Man, which was like a week
Which
after the
already.
hype draft picks.
Mm-hmm.
That means the hype draft was like March. We did it very early.
Yeah, that would have been longer ago. Yeah,
and then Twisters, film of the year.
Love Twisters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just bought the Steelbook because I'm like, I gotta own Twisters forever. My wife was like, "Are you really gonna watch that much?" I'm like, "Yes, I will watch Twisters every day from now on." I haven't watched it yet, and I bought it a week ago, but I'm very busy. But other than that,
The Oscars comp that I keep hearing for Nickel Boys is Zone of Interest because it is like formally risky slash experimental, heavy social justice sort of subject matter. And, some people get it, some people won't. Some people won't be on board, some people won't. But from what you're describing, I don't know if that comparison makes sense because it sounds like Nickel Boys is like much more formally experimental than, like Zone of Interest was sort of a fly on the wall approach. Maybe
don't
not.
get me wrong. This is still, it's told in linear fashion, and you get a chunk of these boys' lives, and some timeline play, not as much as We Live in Time, but certainly some flashes forward and then return to the primary story. And I don't think I feel comfortable with that comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, something like Everything Everywhere All at Once is way crazier and zanier and trying for something completely different. But some of the editing choices kind of made me feel more in that space than the Zone of Interest space. Zone of Interest is
It's a little bit more frenetic.
Still. Yeah, definitely
Mm-hmm.
frenetic. That's a great word for it. Zone of Interest is so still, and so it feels hallowed and sacred as you watch Zone of Interest. And as much as these issues are compelling, I never felt that. And while it is a story about race and racial injustice, it is also just very much about prison and how people got treated in prison in this time. And yes, it matters that those are Black boys, but it doesn't really necessarily put the racial valence on it at all times.
Well, so we've got one down. What's the
Yes.
other film? The other film was The Brutalist, which I was incredibly jealous. I saw your social media post and realized that you saw it in 70 millimeter. And I was like, Greg is just living the life. Living the life.
Well, and that is why they moved it to the Somerville Theater. So the Somerville Theater is one of our great, the Brattle as well. We are just blessed in this city. We have 3 incredible theaters, the third being the Coolidge Corner Theater, and they're all on the subway and they're all within a half hour of my house. And it's just such a rich gift that I do not look in the mouth. So they put it on at the Somerville, and the Brattle was totally okay with it because they're not equipped for 70. And the Somerville had gone through a major remodel a couple years ago with a Kickstarter and all that gave them just an incredible system for projecting. And I guess I didn't know this. There are like an array of soundscapes that accompany 70 millimeter, and I think they said there are 12, and 11 of them they can do in this nice old beautiful Art Deco theater, which is just such a blessing. And so The Brutalist is a time. It is an evening at the movies. It is a long evening at the movies. So it is runtime was 3 hours and 45 minutes. And we won't talk about current events, but I'll say that's how I spent my last night before the election was all night ahead of sitting in a theater watching The Brutalist. I got there obscenely early, intending to go for a walk around the square and get a few steps in, and saw that the line was already huge. I had a reserved seat. It wasn't like an open screening or anything, but I got right in line, and I did my usual play, which is I went up to the balcony. And in the balcony, I was able to sit immediately behind the small roof where the projector is. So I was dead center right there. And I was like, take me away, take me somewhere I've never been. And I will say the opening moments, I was like, we're back, baby. Pure cinema. Let's do this. It's so incredible. And what I don't think, I haven't heard a lot of coverage of The Brutalist because I've skipped those podcasts because I hadn't seen it. But I will say what I was not prepared for is the experience of the sound. I think this is a shoo-in for best sound, and maybe my choice at the moment. I mean, Dune is hard to compete with thumping, but it is really, really wonderfully done. And there were times where I was sitting in the theater, and I kept thinking like somebody was on their phone behind me, and then realized it was part of the soundscape of the film, that, they'd placed it in the surround sound correctly, and so on. It is. So one thing I had heard about The Brutalist is you do not feel the time. And I will say I did feel the time. It is long, and it's going to be a tough one for theaters to get many screenings out of in a given day. They did warn us as it started, because there is an intermission. So there's a very brief overture, then the film starts for part one. There's an intermission, part two, and then an epilogue. And they had warned us that, yes, there is an intermission, but it is structured into the film. So it is not that they're shutting off the projector for 15 minutes. They are just playing the movie, but they're bringing up the house lights for those 15 minutes. And it comes up on screen, and there's a still photograph of the characters, and it has a countdown so you can see. So it was really interesting in a giant auditorium filled with film nerds, because everybody clearly wanted to go to the bathroom, but knew there wasn't time for us all to go to the bathroom. If you were seeing this on like a Tuesday matinee, I think you'd be fine, obviously. But I did not leave my general area. I stood up and stretched a bunch, and I heard from others returning. They're like, yeah, the concession line's out the door, so don't even bother getting down there. So that's what you wanted to hear about, right? The concessions. That was your main question. Yes.
Well,
okay.
that's good, just so I can
got a jumbo
strategize.
popcorn, and I got a large hard cider, and I had a great time. It was a wonderful movie. So it is not what I expected, and I'm not sure entirely what I expected. I think maybe I expected Citizen Kane, because everybody describes it as big American epic immigrant coming to America story. And I don't think that is the point of this movie. And it'll be interesting to talk to everybody when you all get to see it, because to me, the point of this movie is a more specific message that feels a little more timely than that kind of familiar trope. And all those familiar tropes are there, but it's not like, I think that's all that's there. I think there's a more important message going on.
Yeah, I'd say the buzz for this kind of has evolved over time. I feel like the initial reactions when it first premiered were like, this is going to be too much of a critic's favorite. It's too art house. It is epic, but it's also not particularly mainstream. And I feel like people have really come around now where I don't hear that as much anymore. And it's more like, this is a great American epic. People are going to go out in droves for this movie. It's going to be great. It's going to be sort of the Oppenheimer of this year. So like, I'm really curious, like, in terms of, you said it wasn't what you expected, but in terms of like art house to mainstream, like, where is this movie on that scale?
It's hard to say it will be mainstream. I mean, the marketing team is doing incredible work. I think Oppenheimer is the right comp. It's that long. It's very similar in kind of, we got a big project, let's do the big project kind of spirit. And but I would say it's more challenging than Oppenheimer. And that is in recognizing the last 30 minutes of it's like the last hour and a half of Oppenheimer is very much not about building the bomb, and kind of all that other plot line can be kind of challenging. But I thought there was more complicating material in The Brutalist. It's, it is not art house in form at all. It's very traditional in form. I think I was not on the long take review group chat, but at intermission, I was like, guys, it's the real deal. Let's do this. I'm all in. Like, The Brutalist is like, you got to get tickets. And then I will say I cooled a little in the second half, and I think that's probably me feeling the length, and it loses some of its kind of momentum and force that kind of felt so exciting and invigorating. Keeping it, vague is tricky, but I will say I think I took Adrian Brody for granted. I think he's incredible and he's very cinematic, but it's not a flashy part in my opinion. And so there were times where it felt like Adrian Brody was just hanging out in a room with some people like acting with a capital ting. And I would say while Guy Pearce is phenomenal, he was playing our grad school friend Tom Whitty. No, he was playing a rich gentleman, but with a kind of, very kind of familiar position in terms of not our grad school friend. But I will say, I do think that his figure will inevitably be compared to Donald Trump. And I think that is going to be a really interesting conversation. That's not to say they're identical or anything like that, but I think the comparisons will come out. And now that that's President-elect Trump, I think it'll be really interesting to see what that does to his chances.
Powerful rich men steamrolling everybody else, kind of like, yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
very much that. The performance that wowed me was Felicity Jones, and I really love Felicity Jones, and I love her in Star Wars. And I don't think she gets enough credit for Jyn Erso, and she has a tough part in this, and is present throughout the film, but not always on screen. So I think it might be a little bit of an uphill battle. I think she belongs in lead. Do you know which category they're running her in?
I believe she's going to be in supporting.
Maybe this is a little spoilery, but she's in part 2. She is not in part 1. So it is a solid. They said in the theater the intermission is an hour 40 minutes in. So it is a chunk of the movie without her. But I thought she kind of stole the show for a lot of the scenes she was in, and I really enjoyed that. And I think it felt a little riskier for her. I've forgotten about her as kind of the Oscar bait version of her, Theory of Everything, and then Basis of Sex. She was excellent in both of those. I'm not sure those were excellent movies in every regard. And then what was the one she did? A different one with Eddie Redmayne. It was at the Aeronauts where they were like balloonists. Something like that.
I forgot about that movie. I think you're right, though.
That was like, oh, this is going to be great. And then it came out and everybody was like, nope, don't worry about it. You don't have to see it. So I don't think I ever saw it. But I liked her with Adrian Brody, and I thought they were very good. And she has a scene that is absolutely her reel. Like, it's ready to go and it's totally loaded and primed for all the very quick cut to this scene and then cutaway moments. So I don't know that I would put her high in that race. It wouldn't surprise me if Gold Derby had her at like 6 or 7. Like, she might just end up peaking from the outside.
Yeah, I was going to say in most lists of supporting actress predictions, she's in the like B team tier.
Yeah.
Of like, we're not sure, but she could make it in.
It's got a little bit of the Claire Foy in First Man problem, right? Where you just, I mean, our wonderful female actresses deserve a little better than to be the doubting woman or the woman who has to support the creative genius and so on, or the driven man. So it's got a little bit of those problems. But my honest reaction is I thought she was better than the men and had a more challenging part.
That's really great to hear, because I feel like any negative reactions I've heard about this movie are about her and performance and people not liking it. And so that's really good. I was like really disappointed to hear that. I'm like, oh, because I really like Felicity Jones. But it's interesting. The Oscar talk is very much like Adrian Brody for sure could win. Guy Pearce, also amazing, probably will get nominated. Not sure if he'll win. And then Felicity Jones is kind of like her, like from Arrested Development. Like that seems to be the reaction. So I'm like really glad to hear that, because I think I've definitely been predisposed by all the Oscar pundits that I listen to.
And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, again, I'm giving my opinion just sitting there, but I can be persuaded that we should be more critical of not giving her enough to do and things like that. So
yeah, is this Emily Blunt and Oppenheimer all over again? That's kind of what it sounds like.
It's not that. But so I would say shoe in for sound editing, picture, best actor. Absolutely. My personal power ranking at the moment, I would put Adrian Brody 3rd behind Ralph Fiennes and Coleman Domingo in that order. So that's a little bit of my beloved Grand Budapest Hotel shining through, I think, and wanting justice. But that's the order I put them in. Adrian Brody, also a Wes Anderson guy. So it's not like I don't like him too. They're just, I think as I started with, I didn't appreciate it enough. It's one of those performances that I think looks so easy, you forget how hard it must be, which there were moments of Coleman Domingo's performance I would put into that category too, but then he really started laying it on in important ways at different times.
When I was editing our Conclave episode, we had all that Oscar talk at the end. And I realized when we talked about Best Actor, we actually didn't even mention Adrian Brody. And now I think that was because at the time, none of us had seen The Brutalist. Now you have. So at least we have
Yeah.
that data point to bring into the conversation. Now, I want to ask about the VistaVision. So for those of you listeners who don't know, this film was filmed in VistaVision, which nobody does anymore. And it's a widescreen format that uses 35 millimeter. So apparently the 70 millimeter is like a blow up. Like it was shot in 35 and they blow it up to fit 70. So did it look different than you expected or than other movies you usually watch? Or like, did that factor into it at all?
It looked gorgeous, and there were definitely some scenes. There was a very memorable scene that took place kind of at the golden hour, and you could just tell. And it was like, wow, this is stunningly beautiful. I will stay vague, but a chunk of the film takes place on a hill in Pennsylvania. And so you see this like gorgeous scenery always around the hill, and you can tell that you're getting you're out in the real world and you can tell it's all there. And I think that would probably be a credit to the VistaVision. It didn't feel wholly different than times I've seen like a Tarantino movie or a Nolan movie in 70, but it's interesting when directors are kind of pushing out this trick, right? So for me, Tarantino, it was a huge deal when Hateful Eight came out at this same theater. Actually, it was like, we'll give you a program, there'll be intermission, like it was like a whole thing, and it was fine, but I don't think that's a film that needs to be in 70 because most of it takes place inside that one building. There are exceptions to that. This did use its big format, but I didn't feel the same kind of awe I felt at Oppenheimer. In Oppenheimer, it could just be Cillian Murphy's face, and you were just like, oh my God, this is the most stunningly beautiful face I've ever seen, even though like he's a weird looking dude. But like there was none of that. I never felt that. It was more like, okay, here's a grand vista, kind of more like a biblical epic, like, Ben-Hur or something, like, oh, amazing. That's a great shot. So the I think it's the poster, the still image of the Statue of Liberty upside down.
Yeah.
That's within the first 5 minutes of the movie. It's, it's this kind of high momentum, high energy opening. And that was like kind of incredible and mind blowing that it's like, oh yeah, like how bizarre and how strange to just look at that in that light. And there's also a very early, very awkward sex scene that turned the couple next to me. They were like, nope, like we don't like, and they were at the intermission, I could eavesdrop on them, and they were kind of, Emerson kids, which is like art house kids. I think they were out of college, but they were very much like, well, but I don't know about this treatment of women, and I just can't excuse that. And in a way where you're like, you think that, but you also are performing that, right? Like you can, we're college professors. We can sniff that out when they're just performing something like that. So I think that will continue to be a complaint. We did not hang out and talk after the movie, so I don't know if the second half with more female characters kind of fixed that for them, but it was weird.
You should have told them to go watch Anora. Let's see how they reacted to that. That's funny. Yeah, that's funny. I have not heard, I think because other films have so many more sex scenes that I haven't heard that from critics. That's a thing. But interesting.
Certainly it's no Anora. I don't think any film has been more Anora than Anora. But yeah, I do think I was a little surprised because it's, it's a period piece and you don't necessarily expect that, but it's a part of the story. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I obviously, to wrap it up, because we have to get to the real show, I will just say, both of these are definitely worth seeing. Both of these are definitely deserving of being in the conversation. My dissatisfaction with Nickel Boys does not mean I don't think people should see it, does not mean I don't think it deserves a Best Picture nominee. As I think I said on air last episode, or sometime recently, I'm still waiting for my 5-star Oscar movie. Like, this is mine. I love this film. I really am rooting for this. It took me until American Fiction last year to really feel that. And I haven't felt that this year, and I'm running out of movies. So I'm a little nervous. Not not much for me, right? In terms of Best Picture nominees, I have not seen Emilia Perez. I have not seen Blitz, but it doesn't sound like that's going to be a 5-star for me. So maybe if Complete Unknown completely blows away these expectations about it. I tried desperately to not be talking to you tonight and be in a Gladiator 2 screening, and that didn't work for me. But maybe Gladiator 2 if it's as good as it says. But
Nosferatu?
I'm Nosferatu, sure. I'm open to anything because this is what I want to feel at Oscar season. I want to really, feel amped up and like I'm really have a pony in the race.
You haven't seen A Real Pain yet, have you?
No, and that's
I
kind
think
of
you're
a
gonna
Greg
like that a
movie.
lot.
I don't know
Yeah.
exactly what a Greg movie is. I know what an Antonio movie is more than a Greg movie, but having something a little quirky and a little silly seems to work for me, and so maybe that will be the one. I do like the Culkin, Kieran Culkin.
Kieran Culkin, yeah.
Yeah, so that
He's
should work
really,
out well.
really picking up steam for supporting actor. So sorry, Guy Pearce.
I mean,
you didn't just win an Emmy.
It's kind of fun to see Guy Pearce though, because he was so big when I was in college, because that was the Memento moment, and his Time Machine was filmed at my wife's college, so we like went opening night to be
wow.
I want to see the building I go to school in, and so like he felt like a huge movie star. And then he kind of had that resurgence for Iron Man 3, and then he disappeared for seemingly a long time. I assume he's been in like prestige TV or something, but
what has he been in?
I don't know. I feel like a lot of direct to iTunes movies, like Liam Neeson does these days or something like that. But the Mark Wahlberg movies you never hear about, but just see thumbnails of. So I'm excited for him that he's in this race, and it's exciting. But I think don't think he'd be my pick currently, and I think wanting to see A Real Pain, you're right. That's probably the best one I have.
I think you'll really like that one.
Or Gladiator. We'll see.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your initial reactions to these movies, Greg. I think you're making me anticipate them even more. So now we're back to our Anora review. The short take, what was everybody's reaction to Anora?
I thought it was really funny and exhilarating until it wasn't. And that's very much by design. The first act is maybe like the wildest party you've ever seen on cinema this side of Babylon. And it's just really, really just charming and great. But the movie does a really nice job, I think, of showing what happens when the party ends and like reality takes hold. So I have some thoughts on sort of like the transition from like that beginning to the ending, which I'll save to later. Normally, a movie sort of tells you what it's going to be within the first 15 minutes, but this one evolved in interesting and surprising ways. What did you think?
This is 100% a film worth seeing, and I completely agree with Jen that you should go in cold. For me, the reason to see this is Mikey Madison. I think she's transcendently good, and it's very much that kind of young ingenue lane, and yet somehow the most audacious and wild version of that I think I've ever seen on film. There were times I felt deeply uncomfortable and was looking like, are we allowed to be in a theater doing this? And there were times when I just felt like totally like engrossed and a part of this. And a lot of that was her performance. I really am interested to hear, we hinted a little bit last Oscar talk, so I'm really interested to hear what you all think about this film and the Oscars, because I'm having trouble parsing those out. But none of that has any hesitation, towards recommending this and saying, this is not the one to watch with your parents over Thanksgiving or Christmas. Do not make that mistake. Oh, I heard about this movie. It's supposed to be good. Don't do that, but definitely worth seeing. Yes. Oh, and don't watch it on a plane. Go ahead. PT, what do you think?
Unless you have a particular kind of dynamic with your parents, you definitely want to skip this one with them. But I love this movie. I thought this was incredible. We were talking not off mic, but off recording about people trying to find their 5-star like runaway favorite movies for the season, and I'm pretty sure this one is mine. Like I thought this one was great. I echo fully the praise for Mikey Madison. I think all of the supporting cast, that the prominent supporting cast, is incredible and does their jobs really well. There's like a real interesting, and maybe this is, Antonio, what you were getting at. Like there's a mix of tones and almost genres that it pivots through over the course of the movie, which what kept it surprising, but also in my mind very cohesive. And I thought like the whole package came together in a incredibly successful way. I thought it was wonderful. Jen, how about you?
I also really enjoyed this. I think the second act is probably my favorite, and that's because I just laughed so much more than I was expecting to throughout the whole movie, but especially during that middle part, which we'll talk about in spoiler mode. But I thought it really juggled, sort of as everyone's saying, juggled these different elements really, really well. Like the fact that once I finished it, I was like, I can't believe this was, on the one hand, this funny, but on the other hand, this completely tragic and heartbreaking, right? Like, and it has all these different things kind of swirling around in it. And I do agree that like in the first act, like the first 30 minutes or so, I thought I knew what the movie was, and then it kind of opens up and unfolds other layers and kind of keeps doing that a couple more times throughout the movie, where you're like, wait a minute, like what? Where is this going? Right. But in very much a good way, in a way that by the time you finish, you look back and you're like, oh, I see the sort of the grand plan. So it's a movie that I think you need to stick with to the end to truly appreciate sort of its vision and kind of what it's going for, and its complexity, right? Like I think each layer introduces another level of complexity, both to the plot and to the themes. So I was really high on this. Like the ensemble cast for this, like the supporting actors, delightful. I was like I co-signed the Mikey Madison take, but everyone's going to be saying that. But I want to say, let's not forget about the actors who are just like supporting her really well. They're so funny and charming and more complex than you think they need to be. But yeah, this movie has a lot to say, I think, about class in particular. And again, I would not have necessarily expected that going into it. I didn't actually know what to expect probably going into it. So we've already kind of started. I think it's hard to talk about this movie without going into a recommendation algorithm to be like who, like kind of to place caveats on it of like, oh, okay, like don't see it with your parents, right? But I guess what else are we gonna kind of put in the recommendation algorithm?
I really I've seen this trailer so many times over the last. I mean, it's not Speak No Evil, but it is another one that has kind of been attached to everything. And one of them says something very silly about how like this ain't your mama's Pretty Woman or something like that. Essentially, is the attitude of like, this is just like a more extreme update. I think the actual quote is something like, "This makes Pretty Woman look incredibly tame," or something like that. And so it's interesting to me that seems to be like the only cinematic comparison, because like there's a sex worker in that. Like let's go with that. The other comparison I've heard is this is Uncut Gems, which I don't really go with that, but I think those two help capture the two halves. My personal feeling is this is very much a natural evolution of Sean Baker's style and his career. I went on that journey this fall to prepare for Anora. I thought the Florida Project was incredible, and I thought Red Rocket was not exactly my cup of tea, but everything about it was very well made and kind of fit to that. It made me realize Anora would be about class, because this is clearly his kind of central concern as a filmmaker. So if you have enjoyed those movies, this is very much of a piece with those, and I think worth your time.
The third movie that I've heard along with those two, with Pretty Woman and Uncut Gems, is Midnight Cowboy, which is an older movie, and I will admit I have not seen that. But is a Greg, for your Best Picture project, have you seen that?
I just watched it last week because I got to 1970, I believe, is when that is the Best Picture winner.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good comparison. I won't talk anymore.
Well, yeah, but but again, that I guess is sort of some of the more grittier, grimier components that are not really there in Pretty Woman, and are there in Uncut Gems, but Uncut Gems is more the sort of momentum, energy, and people trying, like striving, but not necessarily getting not trying to find their paths to get to where they want to go, and it's not the way that they think they will. So yeah, I mean, in terms of recommending it, there is like a lot of sex in this movie. There's a lot of sex work being displayed. There's no like, you know, hardcore pornographic level stuff, but it's a lot of sex work being shown. So if that's something that makes you squeamish, or if you know, that might select who you see the movie with, you know, your parents, your children, that particular, you know, group of friends you may go see the movies with, but it's like they're not going to like that, or I'm not going to want to see it with them. I think that's probably the big deal. I think otherwise, if that's something you can, you know, take in, that's something that you can, I don't want to say enjoy, that feels loaded, but if that's something that you can be a part of your cinematic experience, I think anyone who wants to see a movie about adult problems and characters, and have had, you know, like Jen was saying, it's fun and it's funny, but then it's also can be very emotional and tragic. So yeah, I have not, the only Sean Baker movie I've seen is Tangerine. I've was meaning to take the same journey that Greg took through his bigger movies of Florida Project and Red Rocket, but have not yet done that. But I can only assume if you have liked those movies, like you've probably already seen this, or you're seeing this as soon as possible. But yeah, Antonio.
Only thing that I was just going to add, because I agree with everything that both of you have said, is The Worst Person in the World was a movie that I really loved a couple years ago, and that's awesome, sort of irresistible, but you really should resist pairing, but also a movie that sort of unfolds in unexpected ways. So that was the only thing. I think that it is a very singular film. It's a very unique movie, so finding like comps is kind of difficult, but that's to its credit, I think. Jen, what do you think?
Question I put in our outline for this segment was, you know, we've already talked about how it's kind of blends so many different genres together. Is there one in particular that people are going, if you like that genre by itself, you will like this movie more? Or is it kind of like you have to be in for the whole package deal? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing I'm kind of mulling over, because on the one hand, people who like sort of, I don't know, organized crime, like almost like a Guy Ritchie movie. Kind of, there's a little bit of that fun. The elements of this movie that are fun and funny are kind of like that. But at the same time, if you're a hardcore Guy Ritchie fan and you start this movie, you might be like, "Why did Jen recommend this to me?" You know what I mean? Like, so yeah. I guess for me, this is a tricky film to recommend to a certain subsection of viewers for that reason.
Not to be gross, but I'm trying to picture a Guy Ritchie fan who would be upset about a long strip club scene, and I
Well,
can't.
no, but
Like, that's like a circle, that Venn diagram. So,
but they would be upset being forced to kind of contemplate why they like it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
or to, you know, like they don't want. I think they're. I see what you're saying, but they might, the more social commentary that's in this movie, they might find uncomfortable.
It's just Jason Statham sitting there going, "That bird's got to put her clothes back on," like just being real grimy about it, but also moralistic. The one thing I think I would say that maybe not as often as Greg has seen it, but I have seen a trailer for this movie a lot, and there's been a couple of them that have come out. The thing that I don't think it's giving much away to say, the thing that's more in this movie than it looks like there will be from the advertising is a sort of antagonistic bickering, like that merges into physical comedy at times. And so there's that kind of, I don't even know if that's really like a genre, but I'm thinking about like Ruthless People and The Ref, where you have sort of like people who are trying to like do their thing that's like kind of outside the law, and there's normal people who are getting in their way, and they're just like, oh my god, like what's happening? And that frustration, when we're, you know, talking about how like the genre changed, it really falls into that genre for a solid 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And I think it's possible that people who might really love that wouldn't know that from seeing the ads for this. And, you know, are they going to be turned off by the first part of it? Maybe, but also maybe it would open the door for them to think about some things they weren't thinking about otherwise.
The last thing I'll add before we move on, I think, is if you are at all a fan of immigrant stories, or if you are the child of immigrants, I think this movie has a lot for you. I mean, I'd say doubly so if you are of Russian descent. If you grew up in a household speaking Russian, like we should probably say that too. There's most of this movie, half of it is like spoken in Russian, right?
Mhm.
Like there's
Yeah.
a lot of especially like in the second half, I want to say there's a lot more
Mm.
Russian that's just flying around as opposed to like in the beginning. But anyway, all right. So we are going to go into spoiler mode. If you have not seen Anora, and we're all recommending it, with some caveats. But yeah, if you've not seen Anora, please go see the movie, return, and join us for the rest of the conversation.
Look, we never talk about it, but I love when that saxophone comes in, right?
Oh,
Like
it's
we're
so
all
good.
grooving, and then all of a sudden you're like, "Whoa! I forgot the saxophone's coming in. I'm here, man. It's so good." All right, then say whatever you want.
That music always makes me feel like we're in Ocean's 11, like we're like
Yeah.
we're
Heist.
a heist team. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great. So I often want to go straight for the ending once we go into spoiler mode because that just feels right. The ending of this movie broke me. Like I was very upset. And so my question is like, in our outline, I put how much does the ending of this movie break you? But maybe the better version of that question is like, how much does this particular ending then change the rest of the movie for you, or does it?
Well, Jen, can we turn it on you for once and ask
Okay.
why did it break you? Like, or what was the breaking component?
It broke me because
See,
I
when
think
Jem was married to an oligarch, and then his mom came and broke them up.
She didn't get the ring back. She's like, all I wanted was that ring. It's like worth 30 grand.
I'm not gonna respond to any of that. Basically, Mikey Madison, I think part of the reason her performance is so charismatic and mesmerizing in some places is because her character Anora is incredibly tough and does it. And like part of the wonder of this movie is you see her wherever she goes, she has that kind of like very stereotypical sort of New York, like, what about it? Like kind of sassiness to her, right? She doesn't care. It takes a judge in a courtroom to be like, can you please be quiet and not swear? Right? Like, and so having kind of fallen in love with her character the whole movie, that she's so tough and so unflinching. And, even though the ending this movie, like she loses, quote unquote, right? Because she ends up bending to the will of this family, that she still like kind of spits in their eye and is like, here, like she throws a mink coat at them. Like it's just baller moves left and right. You know what I mean? Like she's a total boss. And so then to see her finally have a moment of sheer vulnerability and she almost seems like scared. And like for the first time, you kind of see how not just all these events, but sort of her profession as a sex worker has taken a psychological toll on her. Partly the scene, I was like, I want to hear your thoughts, but like as the scene was unfolding where they're in the car, what did you think was actually happening? Because like there was a point where I'm like, wait a minute, is he actually not a good dude? And like we've been lied to again? Like what is going on? Because there's a moment where they're like struggling with each other. And then I don't know. So I'll throw it back to all of you. What did you think?
Well, first, I want to say let's put some respect on it. It's not a mink coat; it's a Russian sable coat.
Oh, thank you.
That was
which is more expensive.
It is more expensive. Yeah, I mean, I was with you in terms of being like, what exactly is happening? I think the last scene is what makes this a masterpiece. That it's a really fun movie, and it's a really good time. And then the last the last 10 minutes, but really the last like 2 or 3 minutes are why I was like, oh yeah, this is incredible. This is up at the top of my pile for the year. And there is that moment where you're just like, basically, who's fighting who in this moment of sort of them, like they're wrestling a little bit. But to me, I didn't think it was. I mean, it was sad because like she let her emotions out, but in a way, I was more thinking that it was actually beautiful because this is the first time she had a real moment of connection with someone else in the movie that wasn't transactional. She approaches everything in life in this like hustler mindset of like, I gotta grind, I gotta like do this, I have to I gotta like. I know. Sorry,
No
Craig.
pun intended. Come
Crazy,
on,
crazy.
PT.
Yeah,
Come
but
on.
I thought if I zoomed past Hustler, it would be fine, and then I said Craig as well. I was like, okay. But yeah, no, but it's that there's always needing to establish connections, not for a connection, but to get something out of it. And even living with her sister is just this like fight about like, no, I didn't get the milk. Like, that wasn't like on my list of priorities. She had other things to do, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's no like, I actually, when I left the theater, I was like, has she looked into any other character's eyes? And she does, because she looks at Vanya's eyes a couple times. But like that moment when she's just looking at him and is like realizing like he's not trying to get anything from her. When she stops, he stops. And it's just like, oh, this isn't about just like you getting your desires or whatever you want. Like you're waiting to see what I want, and you want to figure out what exactly are we doing here. And that's when she breaks. And I was like, I thought that was absolutely wonderful. And then that like her like quietly sobbing and just the repeated sound of the windshield wipers brushing off the snow, that like little squeak of just life like continuing to tick away, I thought worked incredibly well. And so it broke me in that I was like, it broke me to think this movie was incredible, but instead of thinking it was like just sad that she was sad, I was like, I actually was really happy that she was letting herself be in her actual emotions and not just putting up her front because she thinks that's what she needs to do to get by. I don't know. What do you guys think?
The movie very much sets us up to want Igor and Anora together. There are a lot of moments that are just like Igor's face, and him being disgusted at like how she's being treated, and him being compassionate toward her. Um, so the first move was in this incredibly complicated final scene was when after she gets the ring and she sort of like reverts to the beginning of the movie, Anora, and she like does the sort of like lap dance in the car, because as PT pointed out astutely, right, like she views this potentially as just another sort of like transactional exchange. She got the thing and now she's going to do her thing, but then he kisses her and sees her with something possibly beyond just lust, and we see, as Ben pointed out, this incredibly steely woman who is not afraid to fight, and has fought the entire film, right? And it's not afraid to throw a punch, is not afraid of anything or anyone. And I I found it beautiful, but also sad, as Jen did, because to watch someone fall apart, not in the face of violence, but in the face of like tenderness and a sincerity that she can't bear to accept, or that looks foreign to her, like that that on top of the fact that like I think that after the windshield wiper, it's pretty much silent when the credits go through. So then you're sort of left with this quiet, with that image, and with and to just sort of think through like what you just saw, right? And it's that last move that I agree like elevates this film even further. Greg, what did you think?
I think I was asleep by this point. No. It was. I think it's. I'm joking because it was absolutely transcendent in all the ways that you all have just described, and it's hard to add to those masterful takes. I will say in the moment after, I kind of had that and I kind of sat with it for a minute as the credits rolled. I did see this late at night, so it was like 1 a.m. when that was hitting me. And one of the first things I did was read PT's review, because I think I saw it just after you, PT, and so I was like, oh, I think he nailed it. I think that's really a really wonderful take. So I'm not here to pretend to be smarter than that, but I think I put another slight valence on that, like just a little different than what's been said, in that it so spoke to me because Anora or Annie the movie is so clear that you should call her that, and I can't do it, but I thought that just over the course of the movie, it was very apparent that this woman has exactly one way in which she has any worth, and that this whole world is all circulating around her and this is where the kind of ingenue role comes out, right? Like, she's young, she's pretty, and she is going to put out. And so that's why the world loves her. And I thought that, when she's then confronted with this incredibly kind gesture from a very familiar man at this point, like, she's like, oh, that's right. Well, he gave me something I cared about. So I have this one thing that anybody cares about me. So I should give it to him, and climbs on top of him and, is prepared. And then that last image, which is very haunting in all the ways you said, there's this cliche when, awful sex things happen in society. We're like, well, as the father of a daughter, I don't believe in this. But like that moment, I thought purposely used their physicality to make her look very small and childish in a kind of, she's somebody's daughter. We don't know who, right? We don't really know that backstory, but like to show her kind of collapse to this pre-sexual awakening child in so many ways, I thought that was very striking as well. So it's not really a feminist message, but it's like there's something there to me, in addition to all you said, that it's not just transactional, but it's that I don't think Annie understands that she has any value in this society other than her body and the sex work she does. And I think that to me was the heartbreaking part. And it broke me, Jen, because I identify with that so much. That's just my life story. So
Well, you tripped up over her name, but I feel like the movie is trying to say something about her identity through the name thing, right? She is so adamant that she does not want to be called Anora. She wants to be called Annie. But in the sort of precursor to this final scene that we're talking about, Igor says to her, like, they have the whole conversation about what their names mean, and he says, I like Anora better. And to me, I kind of interpreted it as like Annie is this persona that she uses because, like, in her profession, because that's the persona that as Greg so eloquently puts out, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, she's like Annie is the good time girl, and Nora maybe is who she really is on like that, and more complex than that, and has more value than that, right? And so the fact that he is like, no, your name means like light or bright or whatever it is that he ends up saying, right? And that Anora is also the more Russian version of her name. Annie is more American, and I feel like there's something tied into like her sense of identity, both cultural and professional, and in terms of her like and also from like a feminist perspective about her value as a woman and stuff like that. So yeah, it's like it's such a fast scene. It really like kind of ambushed me right at the end there, and it's not for particularly long or drawn out, but it has so much impact on the whole movie in a way I was not expecting.
I agree with all that, and I also left thinking, oh, like the movie is endorsing Anora as her name because of everything around that last scene. Until then, I had sort of been thinking back in my mind that like, because she was like, my name is Annie, like call me Annie. And then all these people with more power and money and, cultural control around her from this oligarch family and the people who work for them were just like, yeah, okay, your name's Anora. That it was sort of about how, like, ultimately, which is I think a big part of what the movie is like she's trying to stake a claim and like make a move, and it's like you can't make a move in society like that if you are not up in this level already. Like you're shut out, and you're going to stay shut out, and they will even tell you who you are. And so to complicate that with and I guess that locks into everything around Igor's character, where he's part of them, he works for them, but he's the one who actually like has a connection. He's the only one who stands up for her in the movie, except I would have to watch it again to see about her coworkers at some
the
point.
moment when he demands an apology for her.
Oh God.
Or he doesn't demand, but he says, I think it would be proper for him to apologize to her, and everyone's just like, excuse me. Yeah. I was like, this is incredible. Yeah, and so it's interesting because like I was really worried because they have that whole conversation about, well, you would have raped me had you had the chance. And he's like, well, I'm not a rapist or whatever, right? But then that final scene, that's what I was really worried about. I'm like, wait a minute, what's happening? Is this taking an even darker turn than I thought it would? So it's just really interesting to sort of pit him against Vanya, who appeared at first to be this Prince Charming character, right? And then we find out he's not, right? And then so to have him be the Prince Charming all along, that's in the background. But then also at the same time, she very rightly points out, support me. You had my hands tied up and you were like trying, like you assaulted me basically, right? And so again, no one gets out of the film scot-free, really.
Yeah. I want to ask a question of the group, because it feels like the twist, there's a twist, is sort of, to borrow a phrase, it was Igor all along. Like, he was there and it's like their love story, but that only really comes through like basically when you start being like, that guy's kind of seems nice, I hope he stays okay, and then he asks for the apology and it's like, oh, and then at the end in the final scene it's like, I see a connection. Was I the only one, or maybe I should say, was anybody else expecting there to be some other big narrative twist about like what was going to happen? Because in a way, what I like is that there wasn't, but I am a little bit concerned that there'll be people who are like, oh, I figured there'd be something more to it. And I think there is more to it, but it's about the depths of the characters interacting and not about actually like this person's that person, or right, she wins in this like weird court, like a lawyer comes in at the last minute and is like, I figured out a loophole, you get $30 billion, like something like that.
This is not Conclave.
Right.
I realized kind of the movie just kept going, right? And I was like, why are we still here? And I was struggling to figure out what that last moment would be that we were striving for. And I would say that basically from when they took the plane back from Reno, because she kind of gets her big moment with the family, and then they're hanging out in the house for a night. And I'm like, well, why are we still here? Like, this party's over. The banger is over. Like, there's nothing going on at this house. Let's get out of here. And I think I really expected, and I was like, I have the perfect answer to PT's question, and he won't say it, and then he did say it, which is, I was waiting for Anora's win, right? I didn't know what it would be or how I would define that. I didn't like expect her to pull out a gun and Scarface them or anything, but like, I thought this movie was so much on her side that to just watch her get beaten down over and over again, I was like, there has to be a moment here where she gets some kind of win. And I guess maybe you could argue that, you know, getting Prince Charming Igor, or again, Igor, the man who made PT, go, oh, in a very charged way. So I was waiting for that beat, and then getting the ring back kind of gets there, but doesn't really kind of check that off. So I think in the end, it is very important that she does not get a full win, that she has to lose in so many ways, because that's what this world does. And, you know, I won't get into Sean Baker's filmography, but you don't often get a win. So I'll leave it at that. Antonio?
I agree with that. I think that it's a lesser version of this movie where Igor emerges as just this sort of like clearly better suitor and like, I don't know, kicks Vanya's butt and reveals that he's rich too or something. And then they live happily ever after. Right.
That's the Netflix version of this movie.
Yeah, it is.
Exactly. He has a medallion around his neck that hasn't been translated. He's Lone Star.
Yeah. I like that Igor doesn't become the easy answer for her or for this movie in the end, because that's just trading one romantic fantasy for another. And again, like, let's not forget that like 24 hours and like movie time ago, he was tying her up. They did have that rape conversation. And one thing that I want to point out about that conversation, not just the content of what she says that I found like chilling, that is chilling, but the tone, like the casual like way in which she says it, that really got me, right? So I think that I just from watching these kinds of movies that yeah, I kind of was expecting, hoping a win for her in the end, and not this sort of silence that happens, especially because like the beginning of the movie is so sort of raucous, that I wasn't expecting it to be quiet. But I think it's that move from raucous to absolute silence. I mean, it wasn't absolute silence in the movie theater. There was like an older couple behind me who started analyzing the movie like immediately. But I guess that's good. That's good. Jen, what did you think?
So I was more cynical. I think I was not expecting any kind of win, because I think the point of this movie is that this is a class system that there was no escaping. That's the sort of tragic realization that she makes, is that she actually had hope for a moment that she could kind of get out of the social position that she was in and not have to live what she would consider a better life, right? And that the harsh reality is that this was never going to happen, that because she is a sex worker, she never had a chance with this family, right? And that everything was a lie, right? So I thought we were headed towards not the ending we got, which is, I think, is much better than what I had imagined, but I thought we were gonna loop back to where the film started, and that we just see her going back to work. And then that would be the super depressing thing of like, yep, like she had this crazy week and she thought that her life was gonna change, and now she's just back where she started. So I like the ending we got much more. I do want to kind of move on to ask, did this ending kind of change the way, or just the like, because I think I have this question of like, how naive was she about this relationship? I think what PT was saying earlier about her everything being transactional in her mind recast what I had read as, like, she was really romantically in love with him, with Vanya, and like had kind of bought into this whole Cinderella story idea. But now that you're saying that everything for her is transactional, was she kind of wide-eyed about what was going on to begin with? You know what I mean? Not to say that Vanya would betray her and abandon her, but that no matter what, their marriage was always going to be transactional, if that makes sense, as opposed to romantic.
I mean, I think that it was as romantic as she could picture, given the experience that she had, but the romance was based on, instead of $100 for 5 minutes in the private room, or I will admit to not knowing the rates. But whatever that transaction is, it is like a mansion, it is furs, it is jewels for a lifetime of being a partner. And that is what seemed like a very good thing. And that seemed romantic to her, that like he will shower her with all of these things. And like, it wasn't like that she didn't like him, and like she may have even have been like, oh, I think that like we have this like real connection, but like all they did was kind of just party, and she would just like be chilling next to him while he played his video games, and then they would go places. Like it didn't like generate any sort of like deep actual connection. But I don't think that precludes her thinking that like, yeah, that I hit the lottery and this is going to work out great. And I think that she believed that he was as into it as she was, and did want to stand up to his family. And so like she had that ace in the hole, which obviously turns out to not pan out.
I think the moment in the movie when it's clear that she had sincere sort of intentions about their marriage, um, was the moment when she introduces herself to Vanya's mother, and this like really cringy, like moment where it's not going to go well. We all know it's not going to. Everyone in the room knows it's not going to go well. But she's a person who doesn't want to look like a fool ever. So the fact that she puts herself out there and tries to play this role, and is genuinely seeming to try to like, well, this is my future mother-in-law. This is my mother-in-law. I think that makes clear to me, at least, that she is not the worst version of like, she's not what everyone around her sort of thinks that she is. She's not just angling for money. This is not what she's here for. I think that the ways that she's sort of like naive about this world contrast to the ways that she's very like savvy about her own world. Like, I think that she understands the desires of men. She understands how to do her job effectively and professionally. She understands negotiation in the context of her world. But I think a lot of people who don't like their work, they fantasize about like what it would be like not to work, and what it would be like to like not to have to do this every single day. And so when the opportunity arises for her to have to have this unfamiliar, kind of pleasure with someone, and I think that she can't resist it. And even though, I think that she's there's probably a part of her inside that realizes that this is going to end. There's a bigger part of her that doesn't want it to ever end.
Shout out to former LTR letter winner, past lives that pioneered the partner playing video games while you're trying to talk to him, which is still my favorite scene in that because it is ripped right from my marriage. With like, just let me put the PlayStation controller down. Uh, I want to outdo Antonio. He mentioned one cringy scene. So the kind of moment that is even cringier is, whenever the couple has sex, it's like he's just like rabidly humping a piece of meat that happens to be a woman named Annie. But there's a moment where she stops and tries to train him to have good sex, and to me that's such an interesting moment in this conversation. Well, again, being a cringy scene, I am blushing as I talk about, because it's like, to me, that's the moment where she's like, okay, I guess I'm committed to this guy forever, and this is the only sex I'm going to have. I should probably try to tell him that, you don't have to just be just awful at this. Like, we could find a way to make this an enjoyable activity for the two of us. And so it's kind of interesting in that context. Like, yeah, is she really thinking this is going to last forever? Because if she was just like, yeah, this is over, she would just be like, yeah, whatever, man. Just like, make it as fast as possible and transactional as possible, to steal PT's word for it. PT's word for it in relation to this movie is so I do think that was an interesting moment, because I want to see, I think it's what Antonio just said, which is that part of her knows this is just not going to last, and so she's almost like trying to trick herself that this could be a forever thing, and it's just not going to. It's crazy. Like that whole sequence in Vegas is just like unbelievably just frenetic and crazy. So anyway,
I just want to note, in relation to that cringy scene, there are a lot of just great moments with people's faces and especially their eyes. And one of those times when he's just like jackrabbiting away on top of her, and like she doesn't break the fourth wall, but she's just looking up at the ceiling, which is near where the camera is, and just has this look on her face, just like, oh my god, like I guess this is what this is. Which to me was like parallel to when Igor has first like is holding her down, and she's like on top of him, and all you see are the top of his nose, the bridge of his nose and his eyes, and he doesn't do anything or move, but he's just staring with this, like, this despair of just like, I can't believe I have to do this. I can't believe I have to deal with this like crazy caterwauling woman who's like, just is struggling so hard to get away. And like those little moments I thought were really incredible.
There is an interesting paralleling of Igor and Anora that I only just thought of because you said that, but like they both have a Russian grandmother, right, who is kind of like made a big impression on them, or had played a big role in their lives. But it also seems like Igor is almost as trapped in the class system as Anora is, right? Because and that's partly the comedy of the second act is like that you're describing, PT, of him being like, I don't really want this to be my job. I don't really want to be like a goon, but like, I guess this is what I have to do. And like, he tries as best he can to not be physically violent with her. Right. And some of the comedy is just like, I thought it was the funniest when he's trying to explain to every new person who enters the room, you don't want to do that. You let her go. Like, like I know what happens when you do that. Don't do that. And no one believes him. It's so funny. But it almost feels like, because the cognitive dissonance of like, well, you say you want to be to support me, and you do all these things that seem kind and that you care about me, and yet the first time we met, you were trying to chase me around a room, and you end up tying me with a phone cord. Like, how do those two things jive with each other? And I think the answer is because he is also kind of trapped in this role as like the henchman that works for this family, and he has to do all these things he's probably not proud of and doesn't want to do and doesn't make him happy or whatever, right? And and yet he still does, because it's what he has to do.
Which is true for all three of those guys. The sort of the three guys that we followed. None of them are like, oh man, what a great job being lined up with this family. Like, they're awesome. I was just like, nope, we have to answer to them, and we have to do this. And if we don't do it, like, I'm in so much trouble. And even then the lawyer shows up, and it's like, we're gonna pull the family's business from your practice. And he's like, okay.
Leaving the baptism for it is just that
So
was
funny.
what had me so. And he's like apologizing on his way out the door, and the wife is
And
it was so brilliant.
How he checks his phone, like he reaches in
Yeah.
his pocket while
Just
they're
to hand
doing
the baby
baptism.
over.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. Oh, so good.
Since we're on the topic, did you have a favorite supporting performance? Because I think we're all probably in agreement Mikey Madison is incredible in this movie, but like, you know, out of everyone else, do you have a favorite?
No, I mean, I'm so in the bag for Mikey Madison that I thought they all did a great job, but it would be hard to single one of them out because so many of the jokes are the layering of the three of them, and one, taking different perspectives and bouncing off of each other. Those scenes in the car where they really ping pong all around, or I really love the diner scene because I love a good diner, and the way the one guy goes and is lecturing these other guys like, why you gotta be mean to me? Like it was so like hilarious, but I just really don't think you can separate them. Even with the ending and with who Igor proves himself to be, I just don't see how any of them could break out and be on their own. If I had to pick one, it'd be Igor, but I don't think we could see them in a supporting Oscar race because it's just not separate enough.
Maybe.
Sorry, wrong category.
I think that means we're an Oscar watch. Should we zoom ahead?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So I'm going to reference something I said in our last episode when we talked about the Oscars. I said it's going to be real, like in 2 months, we're going to be like, oh, wasn't it adorable that we thought Anora was a Best Picture frontrunner? Now that I've seen the movie, I'm willing to backpedal on that a little bit. And it was, after all, the Palme d'Or winner this year, which I keep forgetting. So, but all that said and done, now that we've all seen Anora, like what are the sure bets? Because I think it's clear it's in the Oscar race, right? But is it really like what are the things that's guaranteed to get nominated for? How far do you think it can go? Is it actually the front runner for Best Picture?
We know you have a list, Antonio. Hit us.
I do. Indeed, I do. Best Actress is I think a thing. I think it will get a Best Picture nomination, and I think that's pretty much a sure thing. Best Original Screenplay. I'm going to say Best Director too. I'm going to say Best Editing, though. My one substantive thing about this, I was actually surprised, Jen, when you said your favorite act was the second act. That was the act where I thought, like, this could be a little shorter for me. So, but I still think the editing was masterful, especially in the first act. And then Best Supporting Actor is a sort of long shot for the reasons that Greg pointed out, is that it's difficult to separate. I'll even add beyond those three guys, Vanya as a potential Best Supporting Actor person as well. I think that his performance, he's not a likable character except in the very beginning when he's an incredibly likable character. So I think it can get 5, maybe 6. What do you all think?
Well, I mean, I'm pulling from the current Cold Derby standings, and I will just note that Yura Borisov, who was the actor that played Igor, is currently ranked 7th in supporting actor, behind Jeremy Strong in The Apprentice, a movie that I do not believe is going to get any Oscar nominations as of recent events. So and then number 5 is Stanley Tucci in Conclave. So it's right now he's there, and he got the Gotham's nomination in supporting actor, which is very sort of niche and independent film based. So unclear if that would carry forward, but I think if there is Anora momentum, Anormentum, as some may say, I think that supporting actor could get swept up in there. But as of right now, it is in the Gold Derby for the 5 categories, the first 5 that Antonio said. Editing, but editing's the only one that's not the favorite right now. So it's the favorite in original screenplay, actress, director, and picture. And to Jen's point, it's like, okay, like maybe we're going to look back and be like, that was funny. We thought Anora could actually do this. But, I think it's less, is this movie going to, kind of peter out? And I think it's more the point that I don't want to step on his toes, but the points that Greg made when we were talking Oscars in general, when we did our Conclave episode of like, is this going to, are there going to be enough people willing to connect with this movie and open their hearts to it who are in the Academy? But I will say, the idea of the system exists and the system is big and the people who are in it can do whatever they want and the people on the outside are really just sort of stuck, and the only thing that can save them is if they like make connections with each other. If that's the message other people get, that's the message that I got. If that's the message other people get, that may be the message people want to rally around for this movie. You're gonna get through a bunch of boobs and a bunch of butt to get to it in the movie, so I don't know if everyone's going to finish their screeners. Greg, did I step on your point too much?
I mean, Antonio name-checked it earlier, I believe. I think it was you, Antonio. People quit Babylon in the first 5 minutes, right? And they got through the elephant poop and then quit at the prostitute urine. So I guess we don't know that was a sex worker in Babylon, but I'm willing to put money down. So
were they.
I just want to say, I think everything you all said is accurate. What I would say is that I think if the creators had to pick something, it would be Mikey Madison only. There are a lot of directors right now who are doing those little clips at the start of a movie, like, you've come to the theater, thank you. Here's Hugh Grant pretending he liked being in Dungeons and Dragons to say thank you to you. But Sean Baker came on before mine and did something I'd never seen him do, which they said, hi, you're sitting at the Coolidge Corner Theater in Brookline, Massachusetts. And I was like, what? Are you live right now? Are you with me? But he had clearly, done a personal one for however many theaters he could, or maybe just the independent theaters. But then the rest of that reel was about how Mikey did her own stunts and she worked really hard to learn about the exotic dancing world, to make it authentic and to respect these people and be a part of that community. There's a Letterboxd little special feature out right now about her accent work. She's from all your neck of the woods. She's not a New Yorker at all. And she talks in the video about how she's used to being very up high in her voice and she had to get down low to do stuff. I'm not good at it. At some of that New Yorker stuff. So it's clear that they're putting all their hopes on her and want her to win. I think any of those other categories they'll gladly take and may still be nominated for. But I think if she doesn't get it, it's going to be a real disappointment for the creators.
I don't think this movie walks away with only one nomination, but I think if you're right, if it does only get one, that's the one. And I feel like a lot of people are saying that about several movies this year. Demi Moore and The Substance, Nicole Kidman and Baby Girl, where they're like, well, people might not be that into the movie because of genre reasons or because of the content of it, but the Best Actress performance is undeniable. So, I'm with you there. I was just kind of looking at past Palme d'Or winners, and it's like not that helpful because, the past 2 big ones we had, Anatomy of a Fall was last year. So that did really well. It overperformed. I think it got more nominations, especially Justine Triet, than we were expecting. But wins was like, mostly what like it won screenplay. Yay, right? It wasn't really in the hunt for Best Picture. Triangle of Sadness, I think even less so, right? It had the nominations, but didn't really go anywhere after that. But don't forget, 2019 Palme d'Or winner was Parasite.
Mm-hmm.
And that went all the way. And everyone was like, can this be possible? Is this really happening? Oh, it's happening. Is there the same kind of passion potentially for this movie as Parasite? Parasite is like a thriller. People were really excited about it. And so I don't know if the enthusiasm for it would be the same as for this movie.
Dramatically changed halfway through. just to note, right?
Oh,
Similar
true.
to this,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
So the potential's there. Personally right now, I'm kind of where, and this is why I said this on the last episode, where I'm like, I don't trust early frontrunner status. So I think inevitably it's not going to be frontrunner, but that's not to say it doesn't do well. So I think it will get lots of nominations. I think it could get all the like screenplay, picture, actress,
Cinematography. It could also get
cinematography.
cinematography.
Yeah. So it has a lot of potential, but wins, I think, is a completely different story. I think this movie has kind of like a because of the nature of the type of movie is, regardless of how good it is, I think it has kind of a ceiling in terms of wins.
I would say the only thing I would say to push back on anything anyone is saying is I would say that unless the Brutalist really like reigns supreme and people really like fall in love with that movie, I think this is more likely to win screenplay than to win actress. I think it's correct that they would like Mikey Madison to win like most, but I think it's like Sean Baker can get an award, they can give it to him, they can reward the movie. Like if they end up sort of doing a puzzle piece voting approach, it might be that this gets original screenplay because it's really it's this and it's the Brutalist and it's A Real Pain is like a rough like third place of like, yeah, sure, we'll nominate that. And then it's kind of a jumble of also rans. So yeah, I just think there's less competition in original screenplay, so it has a better chance there.
Counter to your counter, I can totally see Mikey Madison doing sort of what Davine Joy Randolph did last year and what Ke Huy Quan did before that. Granted, like that sort of momentum gained by a really great acceptance speech and charming everybody at those early critics awards. That's usually more likely to happen with supporting categories, but I could like just the type of, because she's relatively unknown and she's so undeniable in the movie. And it sounds like she's fairly out there and charming in terms of campaigning. I would watch out for that. I think that path is definitely there. The sort of like gets early attention and that turns into momentum, which then turns into a win.
I'm down for it winning both.
Her primary competition are people Nicole Kidman and Angelina Jolie who already have Oscars. So yeah, I can see it happening.
All right, I'm really glad we got to talk about this movie. And like, if it does have a lot of Oscar success, you heard it here first. All right, Antonio, where can folks find you? And I know there's only one place.
Find me on Letterboxd at Aelefano, Aelefano. Greg, where can people find you?
Sleeping and pretending that current events have not happened. PT, where can people find you?
Wide awake and pretending that current events haven't happened. Also on Letterboxd at PT McNiff. You can find Greg there at Ion Cannon, EYEONCANON. Don't let him get away with that. You can also follow the show on Letterboxd at LTR Pod. You can follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. You can email us, thelongtakereview@gmail.com, and you can also subscribe wherever you're listening right now. Subscribe, leave a rating, leave a review. Always great to help our visibility. Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sobchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jinn. I don't know how to end.
Just a needle drop of all the things she said. All the things she said, all the things she said.
Okay.
Running through my head, running through my head.
Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.
Can't believe that we're spoiling for Antonio that the Brutalist and Nickel Boys are secretly set in the same cinematic universe where Samuel L. Jackson comes and recruits them all to join the piano lesson. But we'll get into that in a later episode.
That's fan fiction only we could write.